Is Zubimendi the right man to regenerate Arsenal's midfield? Myles Lewis-Skelly is in the England squad. There's talk of a £300 million transfer budget ahead of the summer. And could the Gunners be back in for Bruno Guimaraes? We'll cover all of that and more on today's episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Let's do it. Hey everybody, how are we? Hope you're all good. Hope you're all well. Happy Friday to each and every one of you. Hope you're all having a wonderful day so far. The weekend is coming. The Gunners are in action again. We take on Chelsea, of course, at the Emirates Stadium on Sunday. A game I wouldn't say I'm very much looking forward to, because I feel like our Premier League games have become a little bit of a kind of non-event at the minute. Obviously, I don't think we're going to win the Premier League title. Obviously, the eggs are all very much firmly in the Champions League basket right now. And so my focus is certainly on that competition. But having said all of that, I would never pass up the opportunity to get one over a rival like Chelsea Football Club. And they're not in the greatest form right now. They've had a couple of victories in recent weeks against sides that they were certainly expected to beat. So I wouldn't read too much into that stuff. But yeah, it's an opportunity, isn't it, to inflict a bit of further misery on them, to put their top four hopes in a bit more jeopardy. And yeah, always fun coming up against a rival side. And there's always a lot of emotion and sort of energy around those types of games. We will cover off that game. We will preview that game in a lot more detail on Saturday's show. I figured that we'd do it after we've heard from Mikel Arteta. We do it after we'd heard the kind of embargoed part of the press conference as well, because I think there's often some really kind of interesting points made in those bits that maybe because people sort of look initially at the main press conference, the live section of the press conference, I don't always feel that people give those sections the attention that they deserve. There was a comment that Mikel Arteta made in response to a question about Arsenal's attacking style in the pre-PSV conference that I noted down. And I haven't actually explained A, what he said, and B, kind of my stance and opinion on it just yet, because I haven't found the opportunity to sit down and put together an episode around that. But I think it's so interesting that it is worth a short bonus episode of the pod. So we're going to bring you that over the next few days. Maybe it's one that we can release on Sunday morning. Obviously, we'll be reflecting on the Chelsea game on Monday. So maybe it's one that we can bring you then. I don't know. But I'll try and get that done as soon as possible. The point I'm trying to make is that there's an embargoed section of the press conference, which is embargoed until 10:30 p.m. normally that night, that never really gets the coverage that it should. And Mikel Arteta spoke, I think, quite interestingly about his team, the areas in which they like to attack, etc., etc. So we'll get onto that in a later podcast for sure. Let's say a few hellos to those of you in the chat. We've got Eugene, who's got very, very strong feelings on Martin Zubimendi, who we're going to come on to discuss a little bit later on in the podcast. Junior Gunner's with us. Glenn is here. Leroy, Daniel, Ian, Big GZ is here. Fizzy, Wandering Minstrel. Krish says you weren't convinced of Isak at Sociedad as well. True. Let me explain where my kind of thought process was at when it comes to Alexander Isak back then, right? So Alexander Isak for me was a player that had potential and had a lot in terms of what he'd shown, but the price tag was crazy. There was a 90 million euro release clause. Now, in the end, Newcastle got a deal done for that, for less than that. But at the time that we were interested, there was no indication whatsoever that Real Sociedad would accept anything less than that release clause. So I did have my reservations for sure. Sooty says, Harry, are you saving on electricity to cover the increase in the ticket prices? Do you know what, mate? I didn't realise how dark the broadcast was coming across because I've got my laptop screen full brightness and I haven't noticed that. Let me just run to the light switch and turn it on. Hold on, because you're right. It does look terrible. One sec. And then there was light. That's a lot better, isn't it? Yeah, so basically, Alexander Isak, he looked promising at Real Sociedad, but he wasn't anywhere near the level he is today. Nobody anticipated him going on to be the player that he is today, I don't think, anyway. And it would have been a really, really big and risky move at that time. Obviously, sometimes these things work out in the way that it has with Alexander Isak, and hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's easy to look back and say, we made a mistake, we should have done it, blah, blah, blah. But at the time, I didn't feel that, given all the other work that we needed to do, I didn't think that spending 90 million euros to trigger that release clause was a worthwhile use of our money. I hold my hands up on that. I was wrong, because now, a few years down the line, we're talking about the player and we're looking at him as a potential signing for north of 100 million. So we're going to end up paying a bit more. But what I would say is that if you were to get him now and you did pay more, okay, but it's certainly more of a sure thing than it was back then. And I just think in the rebuild of Arsenal Football Club that we've obviously had to go through over the last few years, I think it would have been really, really, really risky to go and drop that kind of money on Alexander Isak at that point in his career. But anyway, we'll come back to the Real Sociedad players in a bit, because obviously Martin Zubimendi is someone that I want to discuss. We've got quite a bit to power through today. I want to start with Myles Lewis-Skelly, who's been named in the England squad. And look, I'm chuffed for him. I really, really am. I think England's left-back situation has long been a point of discussion. And he's got a real opportunity, in my opinion, to kind of go on and make that position his own. What a rise it's been in such a short period of time. It comes back to that classic debate, doesn't it, of do we want our players going off and playing at international level? Do we want our players going off and having extra games, therefore more risk of being injured, etc., etc.? It's always an interesting kind of debate and discussion, that one, I feel. Look, I think in an ideal world, I'd wrap them all up in cotton wool and I wouldn't let them play for anybody else, only Arsenal. And that way we don't have to worry every time an international break comes around. But I think for the player, it's massive. Like, it's one of the things that you set out to achieve, I think, as a young footballer, to establish yourself as an international. And so, it's huge for the player. I think it gives the player a huge amount of confidence. I think it fulfills a personal ambition, as I've kind of already touched on. But it also elevates their status as a footballer. And in turn, that elevates their value as an asset to the football club. So while in an ideal world, we don't want them to be going off and playing internationals all over the world at times where we are in need of their services and at times where maybe we can't afford to see those players injured. But I think in the long run, it's a great thing for Myles Lewis-Skelly. He'll be delighted. He'll be chuffed. No place for Ethan Nwaneri, unfortunately. Because I think for him, that would have been huge. But we've just had a bit of a reminder, I would say, in the last week of the fact that Ethan Nwaneri, A, is so young, and B, that it's going to still take him some time to kind of get up to speed with playing senior football week in, week out. Ethan Nwaneri has come into this Arsenal side and he's done brilliantly. He had lots of really exciting cameos off the bench previously. He obviously played in the Carabao Cup games and gave a really great account of himself, and we were all chuffed with that. But obviously, following the injuries that we've gone on to sustain, he's had to play a much bigger role than I think anybody would have, A, expected, and B, would have wanted to have him playing as a manager, certainly as a manager, as Mikel Arteta. If he was looking to throw him in at the deep end and he wasn't concerned by the fact that he's 17 and he wasn't thinking about slowly and gradually building him up, then he wouldn't have been, he wouldn't have been still on the bench when we were without Martin Odegaard for such a long time, when there was so much noise around Ethan Nwaneri and the fact that he was maybe the most natural fit. And, get him in. That's what people were saying. But there was a reluctance on Arsenal's part. There was, I think, a feeling that there was a need to really kind of protect him. And you could imagine how it would have gone, right? There was all this hype. There was all this talk around him, which people have been excited about for a long time. And then you bring him into the team for a sustained period of time when the team is struggling, when the team's had to adapt, when the team's trying to cope without Martin Odegaard. You put pressure on this young man. Everyone's looking at him as the guy who, is the savior, is the messiah, is going to come through and step up and cover for the absence of our captain and one of our main men. And then it doesn't quite work out. And it's not a slight on the player. It doesn't work out because he is 17 years old and he's not used to that level of football. And he's not used to playing with those kind of demands. And, people then start to look at Ethan Nwaneri in a very different light. So, again, we do everything with the benefit of hindsight, which is a great position to be in. But I think Arsenal and Mikel Arteta were right to protect him in the way that they did. Going into the England squad, I think it would have been okay for him. But I think he was always going to go into the England squad if he did as a kind of bit part player. It'd have been more about the experience rather than him going in and playing. That's kind of how I see it. So I'm a bit gutted for him that he doesn't get that experience, but it also gives him something still to kind of work towards and fight for. So I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Will he be in the under-21s? I'm not sure. At the time of recording, I don't know about that. But I mean, surely he's got to be in the conversation for some of the sort of youth teams for sure. The other thing that I think is really, really kind of important to note, though, when we're talking about Ethan Nwaneri and other young players in and around the England setup, because I've seen a lot of people on social media complaining that there are other young stars, or starlets, if you like, that haven't been selected in Thomas Tuchel's side. He is in the job, essentially, to win the World Cup. He's been brought in to take England to the World Cup final and to World Cup glory. I think for Thomas Tuchel, probably more than any other England manager of the past, it's going to be about the here and now. And therefore, I expect him to prioritise experience. I expect him to prioritise players that in his eyes will be a sure thing. He's not here on a long-term project. He's not here with a view to developing England over the course of the next 4 to 6 years with a view to them achieving something at some point across the next 3 tournaments. He is coming in to try and win the 2026 World Cup, and it is as simple as that. And so for that reason, I think the chances of your Ethan Nwaneris and some of the other young players on sort of maybe his radar that obviously are eligible and qualified to play for England, I think in the cases of a lot of those players, they're going to have to really make it impossible for Thomas Tuchel to say no, because I think he will prioritise experience and he will prioritise those that have, been there and done it before in terms of going to these major tournaments and in terms of, taking England as far as they have in recent years, because his remit is simple. He's not here on a long-term project. He is simply here to win the World Cup. Okay, let's talk Nico Williams, obviously rumoured to be a real kind of candidate for Arsenal this summer. The Gunners looking, we think, or we hope maybe in some people's cases, to bring him in the summer. And obviously that means that every time he plays, every time Athletic Bilbao are in action, people are sort of keeping one eye and tabs on what he as an individual produces. I certainly have been doing that recently. I've been sort of checking the scores, checking his contributions, and trying to kind of make sense of whether I think he'd be the right fit for Arsenal or not. He scored a brace last night for Athletic Club in the Europa League. They dumped out Roma. I was hoping that Roma were going to go all the way, that you were going to get that kind of Claudio Ranieri fairy tale. What a way it would have been to sort of wrap up things for him. But it wasn't to be the case. Athletic were great and they dumped him out. And obviously Nico Williams played a massive part in that. 2 goals on the night for him. Let's talk Emirates Stadium. Ihsan Khan has reported that Arsenal are considering which way they should expand Emirates Stadium, having had a number of plans presented to them around this. Now, first of all, that tells us that Arsenal are looking to expand the capacity at Emirates Stadium. And I'm always torn when this subject and topic comes up. Look, I think if you want to be one of the biggest football clubs in the world, which some would argue are already, but I would argue, there's more. There's more potential to growth. There's more sort of room to develop into a bigger juggernaut, and there's room to keep improving things and to keep moving forward. And success on the pitch will help us with that. If we go on and win the Premier League title, you instantly pick up a load of new supporters from a different part of the globe. Young kids growing up will be more interested in supporting Arsenal than some of the other clubs in contention. I mean, I know kids who live here in North London, sort of, friends' kids and sort of kids at my son's school and all the rest of it, that have grown up supporting Manchester City. They live in North London and they support Manchester City. Why? Because they've been incredibly successful in recent years. So that proves that regardless of geography, success makes a big difference in terms of building and expanding a football club and its fan base. So look, success is the key thing here, and that's what we should be aiming for. But with success will come greater demand, and with greater demand comes the need, I would argue, to expand the capacity of the stadium. Now, the reason I said I'm torn on this subject is because often I get into debates with people. Often I come across genuine Arsenal fans who are desperate to get down to the Emirates whenever an opportunity presents itself, who acknowledge and understand that they, can't do it every week for whatever reason, whether it's that you live too far away, whether it's that you live overseas, whether it's because you struggle to get your hands on tickets. But there are people that whenever tickets become available, they snap them up, right? Because they really want to. And this is not a dig or a criticism at anyone, because I know that it's not that simple for everybody, right? I've got 2 kids. If I didn't have such an amazing wife who, stepped up and, created an environment that allowed me to kind of go off and do whatever I need to do, then I wouldn't be in that situation. I don't have to be home for any particular hour, for any particular time. If I'm not there, she gets on with it. And that's great. And it enables me to do what I need to do. But I know that's not the reality for everyone. I know not everyone has that luxury. I know some people need to think about their children. Some people have trouble getting time off work, etc., etc. The point I'm trying to get to, I've gone around the houses to get to, is that there's so many people out there that demand that the stadium be increased, that demand tickets become available to them. And when they do, they don't take them on. In which case, what the hell were you moaning and complaining about for all of this time? I've got friends, I'm not ashamed to call out my friends, who bang on about it all the time, who moan to me on a weekly basis, I can't get tickets. When I'm working at a game and my season ticket's going spare, and I get in touch and say, guys, there's my ticket. Do you want it? I don't even want any money for it. I just want it to be used. I end up getting, I can't because, I want to watch this game on TV first, and that will mean I can't do that. Or, I've got to go somewhere in the evening, so, I'm going to be running an hour late. It means if those people really wanted to go, they would go. And my fear about really kind of expanding Emirates Stadium to much bigger is that if our fortunes on the pitch don't kind of go the way that we want them to, if things do tail off a little bit, which can happen in football, right? It's a really kind of volatile environment, football. It's a really unpredictable space. If we end up in that situation, are we going to end up in a situation where, again, we've got lots and lots of empty seats? I mean, the other night for PSV, there were so many empty seats. So while I'm not against expanding the capacity per se, I do wonder how much bigger the Emirates really needs to be. Because yes, for your games against Tottenham and Manchester United and, Real Madrid, it's going to be packed to the rafters. But there'll be a lot of games where people don't feel that kind of urge to go, and you're going to end up with a lot of empty seats. And I'd rather a slightly smaller ground that is full all the time, where we can build and generate a bit of an atmosphere, than a stadium that is bigger, that serves us well on certain occasions, but will not be full every single week. And yeah, that's my, if you're going to expand it by 5,000-10,000, fine. If you're starting to talk ridiculous numbers, then I don't think it's even worth doing. I'd rather they spend the money on the team and not the stadium, as Aaron puts in the chat. And I think he's absolutely bang on there. Lots of positive comments around Nico Williams. I can see in the live chat, Chris says we need Nico Williams. Alfred says Nico Williams is the missing puzzle piece over on our left wing. Guitar Solo says Nico is good enough to start for a non-top 6 club, but he's more of a backup caliber player for top English Premier League teams. If he comes to the Premier League, he will not want to be second choice. The thing with Nico Williams is, obviously he's got that room and he's got that capacity to develop. And I think that's what really kind of excites people about him. I think that's the thing that gets people going. Because as I've touched on before, when you look at his season, and I'll just bring it up now on Transfermarkt, if this allows me to do it, because I've had a couple of issues just sharing my screen over the last few days. I'm not going to share it, but I'll just read it to you because I don't want to end up crashing the whole bloody thing. But basically, in terms of his La Liga season, 23 games, so 23 appearances so far, 4 goals and 5 assists, which isn't exactly like groundbreaking. He's got 4 goals and 5 assists in the Europa League as well in 10 games. It's not a bad season overall if I look at the kind of overall numbers, rather than sort of separating it and dividing it by competition. Let's have a quick look if I can do that. Will it allow me to do that? Here we go. So all clubs, all competitions is what I want to select. There we go. Nico Williams. It's all running a little bit slowly. Don't know why. There we go. 36 appearances, 9 goals and 7 assists this season. It's not exactly like groundbreaking. Do you know what I mean? So people, I think, are excited about Nico Williams because of what they believe he can go on to be. He's just 22 years old, showed incredible promise at the European Championships with Spain. And so, yeah, I understand the sort of the excitement and the buzz around it, if that is a deal that we can do. But I'm still, I wouldn't say completely unsure or even against it. I certainly ain't against it, but I'm not totally convinced on this one. And that's going to bring me on nicely to talk about another player a little bit later on in the pod. And I know that's going to piss off a few people when I start giving my opinion and thoughts on that. Okay, Arsenal, according to various reports, are planning to spend or can spend £300 million this summer. I mean, I'll always say this around these kind of like transfer budget type conversations. Who the hell actually knows what Arsenal can spend or would be willing to spend? Like, it's just something I think that gets thrown around way too easily. Tom Canton mentioned it earlier this morning on the Gooner Talk when he talked about the whole war chest thing. You know, that was one of the typical headlines that we used to get in some of the kind of mainstream media, wasn't it? This huge war chest is available to ex-coach or ex-sporting director and, you know, blah, 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 blah. Like, we've heard it all before. We've heard it all a million times. I wouldn't get too carried away by that. If Arsenal can go out and sign the players that we want them to, great, happy days. I think there's a real pressure on Arsenal to go out and improve the squad because of what's happened this season. And it's not just the injuries. I think there are clearly areas in which we could have been better, like our attack could have been better, regardless of whether we had the injuries or not. We all agree that even prior to the injuries, and look, we could go into Real Madrid with just one of our front line missing, which is a decent position to be in. I know it's not great, it's not ideal, obviously, but it wouldn't be the disaster that we've heard about. Now, the disaster's kind of already struck, and that's why we're out of the league title race. That's for sure. But you get where I'm going with it, right? I think even with everybody fit, even with everybody available, we were missing something in attack. And so there's a pressure on Arsenal for sure to go out and improve the group. Okay, what else did I want to talk about? The £300 million award chest. There's also some talk about Bruno Guimaraes floating around as well. The Newcastle United man is said to be a player that Andrea Berta, Arsenal's incoming sporting director, is a fan of. I like Bruno Guimaraes. It's no secret that we had an interest in him previously. Newcastle proceeded to kind of mock us about that when they eventually got the deal done. But I've always said this about Newcastle United. And listen, they've got a cup final coming up at the weekend. And I genuinely do hope they win it. I'd rather they win it than Liverpool. But your Guimaraes, your Isaks, you know, that caliber of player, how long are they going to stay at Newcastle United if they don't consistently make the Champions League? And obviously, they're in a position where should they win on Sunday, they will, you know, deliver Newcastle United fans their first trophy since 1955. So that's massive. That's huge. There's an opportunity to write your name in Newcastle United folklore. But beyond that, if they've got ambition, they need to move on. Now, if Newcastle qualify for the Champions League, I think the landscape around, you know, their summer completely changes. I think it then becomes easier to keep a hold of Isak. It becomes easier to keep a hold of Bruno Guimaraes. But we got to be there and ready to pounce and to try and benefit from their situation if indeed they miss out. So obviously, I don't want them to qualify for the Champions League for purely selfish reasons, because I want them to be in a position where they have to let some of those players go, in particular Alexander Isak, who I'd love to see. But Bruno Guimaraes would be a very, very welcomed addition to the Arsenal as well. That's for sure. Okay, just a quick reminder. Let's have a quick look at how many likes we've got on the board at the moment. Just the 40, which, guys, it's not good enough. We need way more than that. So if you haven't done so already, please do leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel as well if you're brand spanking new. If you're listening to us on the audio platforms, guys, please do leave us a review there as well. Make sure that you're subscribed, that your notifications are turned on so that you never miss an episode. There's no reason why we shouldn't get it up to at least 100 likes, given how many of you are with us right now. Okay, let's come on to the controversial subject of the day, if you like. Martin Zubimendi. Got an opportunity to sit down and watch him play last night for Real Sociedad against Manchester United. Now, I will preface everything I'm about to say with the fact that, A, I thought Manchester United were good. It was probably their best performance of the season. B, I think Real Sociedad generally on the whole were poor. And so I'll put those two things out there just to provide the kind of backdrop to what I'm about to say. But I'm not convinced that Martin Zubimendi is the right guy for Arsenal. I'm just not convinced. I just don't see it. And this is not an opinion that I have formed on the basis of simply watching him last night in a game where his team on the whole underperformed. I've followed, watched and covered football long enough to know that players can have off days, that players can have bad nights, right? And it doesn't necessarily tell the story of where they are. I'm just searching a video that I did on Martin Zubimendi on the channel previously, and this was back in... it was a year ago. It was streamed a year ago. Let me try and find the exact date. So 1 year ago, 15th of Feb, 2024. I put out a pod, the title, Is Martin Zubimendi the Man for Us? And the thumbnail had the quote from the video, from the podcast of, I'm not sure he's the player for us. So this is not me watching him once, watching him struggle in a game where his team struggled, watching him struggle in a game where they were away at Old Trafford against not a good Manchester United side. I think that's taking it a step too far, but a Manchester United side that were better than what we've seen from them in quite some time. Am I basing my opinion on that? No. I'm basing my opinion on all the times I've watched Martin Zubimendi play. Now, granted, there are people out there that will have watched him a lot more than me, that will be a lot more across Spanish football and Martin Zubimendi as an individual than me. But I just don't see it. I don't see him dictating games. I don't see him setting the tempo. I don't think he's particularly comfortable running back towards his own goal, which makes him vulnerable to transitional football, I think. And I think when you're a team that likes to dominate the ball like we do and likes to play on the front foot like we do, I think you need to have players that are capable of dealing with transitional situations. I think that's why Declan Rice is so good for us. I think that's why Gabriel and Saliba are the perfect centre-back pairing, because they're transition resistant, if you like. And I don't see that in Martin Zubimendi. I don't think he's slow, but I don't think he's particularly quick or physical. And I know I bang on a lot about the need for the kind of more creative types and more technical types. But I'm not convinced that he's the right profile of player necessarily that we need. I think we need someone who's kind of in between. And those people obviously are difficult to come by, and they probably cost a hell of a lot of money. But I think if I were looking to regenerate this midfield, as I'd imagine Arsenal will be come the summer, with the likelihood of Partey and Jorginho leaving the club, I think I'd be looking at someone who's a bit more of a sure thing. And Martin Zubimendi at 60 odd million quid or whatever it's rumoured to be, that feels like a massive gamble. Now, people pointed out right at the start of the pod that I was wrong when I said that Alexander Isak was potentially a big gamble at the time, and he's gone on to prove me wrong and you know, make me look stupid, as well as a lot of other people for sure. But I don't know. There's something about this signing that tells me that it's maybe a bit risky. I look at the deals that we've been linked with in the summer, right? So let's take the sort of general consensus, which is that the three players that Arsenal will be prioritising this summer are Martin Zubimendi, Nico Williams, and Benjamin Sesko. In terms of outfield players, those are the three names that keep being talked about. Those are the three that people seem to believe that Arsenal are very, very keen on signing and will push to sign. First of all, Martin Zubimendi, I'm not totally convinced by him. Nico Williams, I've just told you that I'm not certain that he will be the right guy. And I feel the same about Benjamin Sesko as well, because they've got so much to prove. These feel like signings that have the potential to go bang. And they have the potential to really kind of take off and see Arsenal elevate, but also see Arsenal kind of really make good on the investment on those players. If you get Williams or Zubimendi for 50, 60 million quid and they perform, all of a sudden they're 70, 80, 90 million pound players very, very quickly. The glitz and glamour of the Premier League adds a premium. And if they perform in it, then all of a sudden their value shoots through the ceiling and it's amazing, right? But all of those signings have an element of risk. I guess we're going to have to accept that we're going to take risk and we have to just back off and trust that the people making these decisions are going to get them right. But, you know, Martin Zubimendi, for me, whenever I've seen him play, I've never been totally convinced. I worry about the physical side a lot. I really, really do. I think in a Premier League midfield, you need to have an element of that. And, you know, people say that he's a lot stronger and a lot tougher than he looks, but I'm yet to see it, I'll be honest with you. And so what I did was, when I was thinking about this morning, I thought, rather than me just come here and tell you, no, he's not the guy, and, you know, what I see isn't really kind of doing it for me, I decided that I'd pull up some of the numbers as well, because the numbers in a lot of ways back up what I'm saying here. So let's talk about Martin Zubimendi. Let's have a look at his scouting report on FB Ref, right? And on FB Ref, they compare players to their positional peers in the men's Big Five leagues, UEFA Champions League, UEFA Europa League, over the last 365 days. That's the sort of model that they use, okay? So non-penalty goals, he's in the 33rd percentile. Don't expect him to be in and among the goals because he's a deep line midfield player. I'm not particularly alarmed by that. Shots total, he's in the 22nd percentile. Again, he's not a shooter. That's not what he does. He is someone that is sitting at the base of your midfield looking to build up for you, okay? So I'm not particularly concerned by some of these attacking stats. Assists, he's in the 21st percentile. But remember, this is against players that play in his position. This is not comparing him assist-wise to, I don't know, Cole Palmer, for instance, right? That's not what we're doing here. We're comparing him to his positional peers. He ranks really low in non-penalty goals, shots total, assists, expected assists, and shot creating actions. Like really low. We're talking like bottom 25%. That isn't great. But I'm willing to accept that because I know that his best work is done deeper in the pitch. So then we move on to the stuff that I expect him to be a kind of real leader in. Passes attempted, 65th percentile. Now, is that to do partly with the team that he plays for and maybe their style? Yeah, sure. But 65th percentile for passes attempted. Pass completion rate is only 84.2%. Now, if you're sitting at the base of a midfield, your pass completion rate has to be higher than that. He is in the 48th percentile, which means 52% of his positional peers are putting up better numbers in terms of pass completion. Progressive passes, he ranks quite well. 73rd percentile, he averages just under 6 progressive passes per game. It's not too bad. Progressive carries, again, he's in the bottom 50%. Successful take-ons, he's in the bottom 50%. Touches in the attacking penalty area, he ranks quite highly, which suggests that his position can be quite fluid. Progressive passes received, he's only in the 39th percentile. Now, this one really did surprise me, because in my head, and based on the little, and it is little, if I'm being honest, that I've seen of Martin Zubimendi, I expect him to be the guy that goes and drops deep when you're trying to build out from the back and receive the ball from his centre-backs or from his full-backs or whatever. Those are progressive passes. Moving the ball from the defence into the midfield is a progressive pass. Yet, in terms of the number he receives, he's in the bottom 40%. Now, is that because his team bypass him? Is that because it's an instruction of the manager? I'm not sitting here saying that you should look into these numbers and draw, real kind of final conclusions. But some of these numbers do ring alarm bells for me. Tackles, he's in the 57th percentile. Interceptions, quite high, 75th percentile. Blocks, 78. Clearances, 94th. Aerials, 189. So defensively, he looks quite good. The problem is that I've felt for a long time that when we don't play, with a Partey or Jorginho, that we don't have that line-breaking ability. And I look at his stats here. Progressive passes look okay. Pass completion rate doesn't look great. There's a few things here that just ring alarm bells for me. Now, in a different environment, in a different team, and with the right coach, can he develop and become better? That's quite possible. I would never write him off. But I don't look at Martin Zubimendi and go, that's the guy. In the way that I look at Alexander Isak and I go, that's the guy we need. Go and get him, do whatever it takes. I don't feel that way about Martin Zubimendi. And listen, in fairness to Mikel Arteta and the football club, I didn't feel that way about Ben White. Now I adore the guy. I didn't feel that way about Gabriel Magalhaes, but now I think he's fantastic. I wasn't sure that William Saliba was going to come back in and do what he's done. There's been a lot of players over the years that I've looked at and gone, I'm not sure about you, but the club showed faith in him. The club were willing to take that risk, were willing to take that gamble. They went on and done that business, and those players have proven to be really key cogs in the Arsenal machine. So I'm not writing the guy off, but there seems to be an awful lot of hype around this player, and I personally am struggling to see it. That's just kind of where I'm at on it. I'm being honest about it. I'm not going to sit here and lie to you. I'm not going to sit here and pull the wool over your eyes. That's kind of how I feel about Martin Zubimendi at the minute. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't left a like on the video, guys, what are you playing at? Leave a like on the video. There's over 300 of you with us live right now, so there's no reason we shouldn't have at least 100 likes on the board. Let's try and get there ASAP. We're going to spend the last sort of 10 minutes of the pod taking your questions from the live chat, so please do get them in. They could be about anything you want. Chuck them in the chat. Let's answer as many of those as we possibly can to wrap up the show. Okay, let's take this one from Nasai Bonsu, who says, when Thomas Partey is gone, you will appreciate him, but by then it will be too late. So, I have never for a second doubted Thomas Partey's ability or quality. There's a couple of things that I worry about with Thomas Partey, and it's why I'm resigned to losing him. First of all, there's always going to be that thing in the back of your mind about his fitness. I don't know how we ever really, truly move on from that. We've been burnt by it so many times over the years. He's having a really good season fitness-wise now, and he's having a really good season in terms of his performances. But if you're giving Thomas Partey a new contract, you're not doing that on the basis of what he's already done. You're doing that with a view to what he's going to bring you in the future. So if you think Thomas Partey can keep this up, by all means, give him the contract. Give him the deal. But you wouldn't be irresponsible and give him a 4 or 5 year deal, because that would be silly at this age and given his injury history. So then you enter into the realm where the deal that you would want to give Thomas Partey might not necessarily be the one that works for him. And that's where I think we're at. I'm resigned to the fact that as a football club, we're not going to be able to give Thomas Partey what he wants. If he's happy to sign for 1 more year, by all means, give him the deal. I'm fine with that. But I'm not willing to say that we should be giving him a 3-4 year deal, or that we should be pinning our hopes on him moving forward. If he wants to stay as a squad player, and if he's performing well, he can start every week, I don't care. But if he wants to stay with the view to, us eventually moving on from him, then that's fine. Does he want to stay playing at the top level at a top club, or does he want to end up going off to, for instance, Saudi Arabia and playing a much lower standard of football? It's up to him. It will tell you whether he's motivated by money or whether he's motivated by, the sort of the possibility of playing at the very, very highest level. We're going to learn a lot about him in the summer. But when I sort of say that he's going to be gone, and I sort of say that we need to regenerate and move on from him, it's not because I don't rate the player. I've always rated the player. I'm just not sure that he's one for the future. And when you're handing out new contracts, you're doing it for the future. And if that then hinders you in your pursuit of a really big star signing that you think is going to take us forward, for instance, you can't pay them the salary they want because Thomas Partey's eating up a chunk of it, that then becomes a problem. So, yeah, if he wants to stay for a year and the terms can be agreed, do it. But beyond that, I'm not sure I would be willing to commit. Khan says, Harry, it's easy to look at FB Ref. This is with regards to, of course, Martin Zubimendi. And there's reasons why Madrid, Barcelona, Liverpool and Arsenal are after him. Who was saying Isak would be what he will be after he left Spain. Yeah, I've said it quite clearly on a number of occasions. Like, I'm not writing the guy off. I just don't look at him and think you're the finished article and you're the guy that I want to build my midfield around moving forward. I think he's got a lot of qualities that we're missing. And we highlighted that just now when we went through some of the kind of FB Rev stuff. And I think on top of that, he's got some of the qualities that Jorginho has and that Partey has that we will certainly be missing if those two are to depart from the club come the summer. So don't get me wrong. I'm not sitting here saying that Zubimendi's a bad player. I just need more convincing. I need convincing. And right now, I'm not totally convinced. And I can't help but sort of feel that way. And I'd be lying to you if I sat here and said, oh, that's the best sign. And the thing is that the irony of all of this, right, is that if I had sat here on a podcast for the best part of 40 minutes talking about how great Martin Zubimendi is, I'd have a lot of people saying, well, it's just because that story came out and you're in the club's pocket. And so, of course, you're going to big up and hype up the possibility of signing Martin Zubimendi because you want to try and lift the mood in the fan base because that's what you guys are being tasked to do, those of you that are in the club's pocket. I'm sitting here expressing a genuine concern about a transfer target that I'm not convinced by. If he comes into Arsenal, he'll have my full support and backing, and I'll be desperate for him to prove me wrong. But right now, I can't help the way I feel about that signing. Russ makes a good point where he says every transfer is a risk in its own way. That's kind of been one of my catchphrases over the last few years when discussing transfers. I really, truly believe that. The question is, how big is the risk and are you comfortable in taking it? And if I were Arsenal, I don't think I would be comfortable in taking that risk for that sort of money. I would probably be exploring other options as well. Jid says, having seen Xhaka and Rice play as a left-sided 8, do you think that not having a left-footed position... sorry, let me rephrase that. Let me read it again. Having seen Xhaka and Rice play as a left-sided 8, do you think that not having a left footer in that position has affected the left forward's attacking abilities to make runs from behind? Yeah, I think when you've got players that are naturally left-footed playing there and they can receive the ball, it means they can go inside if they want, but it means they can go outside as well, and it kind of opens up the pitch. I think it's partly maybe why we've become a little bit narrower in the way that we attack. When Rice wins the ball or receives the ball, he's going to shift it onto his right foot, which naturally brings him inside. Whereas with Granit Xhaka, it was receive in your stride, take a touch, look up, use your stronger left foot and ping the ball out wide into those sort of spaces for Martinelli to run onto, for example. So, yeah, I do think it changes the way that you attack. It changes the balance for sure. Okay, what else have we got in the live chat? Keep your questions coming. Keep your thoughts coming. Lots of you agreeing with me on Zubimendi. A fair amount of you disagreeing with me, though, as well, which is absolutely fine. We'll do one of those phone-in shows very, very soon because we got a lot of positive feedback about the kind of impromptu one that we did the other day. That was completely out of the blue, and my wife was furious with me. I was an hour late. Doing something she'd asked me to do because the stream just went on and on and on. But it was great conversation. I didn't want to cut it short. Lots of love for the podcast. Thank you so much. There's a few of you that have said your bits. Brett says, my gosh, you're so bloody good. Thank you, mate. He says, big love for you and your work. Rarely get a live show. Always listen on Spotify. So just commenting to show the appreciation. Thank you so much, mate. Really, really do appreciate that. There was another comment that said that they were really enjoying the pod, which I've lost now. There we go. Maybe Chef. Thank you. Really, really do appreciate all the love and support. Okay, I'll take one or two more. Come on, we're 15 likes away from the target. Let's try and get there. Lots of you, when we're talking about the Zubimendi stuff, the kind of common pushback we get is the whole, well, Real Madrid want him and Barcelona want him. They're linked to every decent player in Spain just by default. And this is where it becomes really important that we learn how to kind of figure out what's credible and what's a load of old codswallop. And in a lot of instances, we do find a lot of codswallop, basically. Like, Barcelona don't have the money to sign a lot of these players right now. So they get linked to them, but is there a realistic chance of some of those deals happening? Barcelona seem to always find a way, but you get where I'm going with that. Any decent player is going to, by default, be linked with Barcelona and Real Madrid. That is operating in Spain. That's how it works. So, yeah, don't read into that too much. A Skywalker says, Harry, do you have any other midfielders that you would go for? To be honest with you, mate, I haven't really kind of sat down and sort of gone through a load of names in order to try and figure out what I'd like us to do. But like Bruno Guimaraes feels like a better fit to me because I think he's got that technical level. Okay, some people would argue it's not sort of elite technical level, but he's got that bite as well. And I think we need a bit of that too. I banged on a lot about the lack of creativity in the team, and I think that's something that generally we have to fix and address. But at the same time, I think we can't afford to lose that kind of physical edge that has seen us close the gap on the big boys and has seen us develop a lot as a team. So it's a balancing act, isn't it? Maintaining that physicality that we need and that bite and that aggression, but also just adding that little bit of creative spark on top where we can. And so, yeah, Bruno Guimaraes feels like a good option to me. But also, I quite like the idea of us playing with a double midfield pivot, 2 players. And I think if we did sign Zubimendi, it will kind of suggest a move towards that, because for all the positive things that we sort of discovered when we were sort of going through the FB ref stuff, the negative for me is, or the big negative, the biggest one, the one I have the most concern about is the one about transition and physicality and being left alone to sit at the base of a midfield. Like, I can trust Partey to do that when he's fit, because Partey has that right balance of being physically quite imposing, but also having that technical level. Jorginho has the technical level, but not the physical level. And so that's why when Jorginho plays, you tend to see the midfield shape just alter a little bit. And I've always said that to get the best out of Jorginho, you need Declan Rice to be a little bit more aware and conscious of his positioning. And actually, when you look back at that period last season where we enjoyed some really good form, and those two were played in the midfield in the absence of Partey, it was because Rice and Jorginho reverted back to more of a kind of flat 2. And that balance of having Jorginho's technical brilliance and ability to set the rhythm and tempo, and then Rice's physical power to get up alongside the forwards when he needed to, but also using his incredible sort of fitness and range to get back and defend alongside Jorginho and protect him a little bit. I think that gave us the perfect balance. And ever since then, I've been very much of the opinion that a double pivot in midfield might be the way to go. Because we talk a lot about our 8s being kind of restricted and our wingers being restricted to operating in certain areas. With that double midfield pivot, I feel like you'd be able to say to the wingers, you can drift a bit more because our structure remains strong. You'd be able to say to Odegaard, you can drift even more than you already do. You'd be able to say to the centre forward, you can go roaming a little bit more because you'd have that structure behind you. And looking at PSG the other night, that's what I felt they had. They had such a good structure that their forward players were just given that little bit more license to go off and express themselves. Obviously, the profile of player helps. And in Dembele and Kvaratskhelia especially, you've got that type of player. You've got those type of players. Barcola too, players that, you know, will just drift, go off and do their own thing, make things happen, etc., etc. So just watching that Luis Enrique side, it kind of confirmed what I've believed for a long time, that if the structure is right elsewhere, you can let people off the lead a little bit more. And I think that's one of the things that Arsenal need to be looking to do. Right, I am going to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining me on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. It honestly means the world to me. I really do appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you haven't done so already. We're almost at the target. We're just a few out. Like, subscribe and all the rest of it. Remember, you can check out the Chronicles of a Gooner over on Patreon. The link is in the description below. You can follow me on X, on Instagram, on TikTok. All the links are in the description below as well, and we'll be back very soon with another edition of the pod. In fact, we'll be back bright and early tomorrow, where we'll be previewing the game against Chelsea on Sunday. We'll have a look into the Blues, try and figure out the best way to hurt them, figure out who should play for us, given that we heavily rotated in midweek. Love to every single one of you, all the best, and I will see you all on the next show. Until then, take care of yourselves and have a great day. Goodbye.